Egyptian army is drowned. God proved himself to be a fortified tower to Israel when Israel ran to him in faith and asked God to help. Or you go forward in history, and you think about the time during Hezekiah's reign, when again the mightiest army in the world, the Assyrian army, under the command of King Sennacherib, invaded Judah. And town after town is falling to Sennacherib. In fact, 46 of the walled cities fall to Sennacherib. And Sennacherib sends a letter to Hezekiah and says, Jerusalem is next. And Hezekiah has no idea what. The Judean army is totally wiped out. He is powerless to resist Sennacherib. But he goes into the temple and he lays out Sennacherib's letter before the Lord, and he says, God, you know that you are our only hope. Listen to the blasphemies of Sennacherib and deliver us. And what did God do? That night he sent an angel. And one angel in one night, 2 Kings 19:35, killed 185,000 Assyrians. God proved himself to be a fortified tower to those who ran to him. And God kept Hezekiah and the faithful of Judah safe. Or one other example. We could just multiply these examples. But go forward in history to Daniel chapter 3. Whenever Nebuchadnezzar had invaded Judah and had carried Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into Babylonian captivity. Now, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they're better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you remember how they were exalted in Nebuchadnezzar's court. And Nebuchadnezzar set up this great image and said at the sound of the instruments, everyone needs to fall down and worship that image. But these three believers in Yahweh weren't about to worship another god. And Nebuchadnezzar threatened, anyone that doesn't worship this image will be thrown into the fiery furnace. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, and they wouldn't burn. Remember how God sent an angel. He sent one like the Son of God to be in the flames with them. And finally, when they were invited to come out, they didn't even land. There would be no plagues in your land. All the nations would recognize that you're being blessed if you would just tithe. Now, I can tell you, I've known a lot of God's people who have tithed and done more than tithing. But I have never seen a person upon whom God has opened the windows of heaven so that they could not find a bank account big enough to put all their money in. A bank account that's too big for his money. He can fit all of his money in bank accounts, you know? That is not a promise for God's new covenant spiritual people. That is a promise for God's old covenant fleshly people. Now, I believe that we're blessed when we give, absolutely. But that is not a promise for us today. I believe it's as much a new covenant promise for us as what it was an old covenant promise. Turn to Romans chapter 8. We could see this from a lot of passages, but look at Romans chapter 8.